Hello, everyone. Sorry for the confusion going live here. Hope you can hear me. Lynn, can you let us know how if people have comments or chats, they can where they can put it so that we know people can kind of give us a clue if they're
Yes, there's a Q&A right at the bottom of the screen, and we'll be doing all of the question and answers after the presentation.
okay. Can you let us know if you are able to hear us and if we're live?
I do see someone saying that they can see and hear you.
Okay, great.
They got to hear our pre,
All of our discussion
yes,
about children and dogs. Okay.
yes.
Um, Now I have to figure out how to share again.
I can see your slideshow, so you just got to get to your screen.
Yeah, I can't see the slideshow. I see faces and not the slideshow. All right, we'll just give this a try and hope we can get through it. Welcome, everyone. Hope you find this informative. We just got back, a group of us from a PCD meeting in London, where it was the first group of PCD advocates, groups from all over the world getting together to talk about the priorities in PCD. And it was so encouraging to see how much has been done in PCD world. I'm still trying to figure out I can see okay, hopefully that'll work. But we thought today that it would be nice to focus a little bit on what we're doing here in North America. We get very busy doing things, but we sometimes don't really talk about what we're doing. So we wanted to make the community aware of what the PCD Foundation is doing. And I'll try to go through this very briefly, some of the history, because it's probably something that a lot of you know already. But for those who don't know, I thought it would be good to do just a nice kind of overview. Lynn, can you let me know if I'm actually moving slides ahead?
Yes,
Did it work?
yes.
Okay. So the PCD Foundation is a voluntary health organization, which just means that we are an advocacy group. And our focus is, of course, on primary ciliary dyskinesia. We are a 501c3 organization, which means we are tax exempt. So donations to the PCD Foundation can be taken off of your federal tax returns. This is an important distinction because it helps us be able to take advantage of other kinds of programs, and it's nice for our donors because they get something in return for their support for the PCD Foundation. So we started really in 2001, and we received our tax exempt status in 2004. But in that time, we also partnered with and helped establish what is called the Genetic Disorders of Mucociliary Clearance Consortium. And that is a North American research network focused on PCD. This was begun in 2002, and they first enrolled patients in 2004. And this was kind of the North American version of other similar research networks that had popped up in other areas, all of them very productive. And I think it was helpful for us as an organization to partner right away with the GDMCC because it really established our priorities and what we wanted to accomplish as a patient group, which was to make sure that people with PCD had access to research and evidence-based therapies, and that we could really start to move things forward. This fit our mission of trying to improve the quality of life for those affected by PCD and develop the means to find a cure. Early on, we never referenced cure because we thought that it was so unattainable that it might be discouraging. However, about 6 or 7 years ago, we changed our mission to include finding a cure, and you'll see why we've done that in some of the upcoming slides. For the first 10 years, we were only a volunteer organization. Then we went to one part-time person for a year and then moved to 2 part-time people. And just in the past, probably 5 to 7 years, we have expanded our staff. We now have 4 full-time staff. Plus, we provide some support for salaries for a registry coordinator and 2 medical directors. And you'll see more about that in future slides too. So just so everybody is aware of what we are talking about with PCD in North America, if we look at Canada, Mexico, and the US, if the statistic of 1 in 15,000 people have PCD is true, we're looking at about 34,000 people. If the newer statistic, where we're thinking there may be as many as 1 in 7,500 people with PCD, we're close to 70,000 people if we look at Canada, Mexico, and the US. And these numbers will be important as we go on, because you'll see what a big job we have and how we've really just barely scratched the surface of identifying patients with PCD. So we run several programs. Probably our biggest one is the Clinical Centers Network combined with the PCD Registry, which together we call the Path to Clinical Trials program. And the focus of this program is to get our community ready for trials as they become available. When we first started this, there were really no clinical trials in PCD. When we say clinical trials, we're talking about studies of interventions, so therapeutics of some sort. There were clinical studies, and we were doing through the GDMCC natural history studies and important foundational work, but there weren't really clinical trials. We didn't have a tremendous amount of interest in therapeutic interventions for PCD from industry and from pharma. That has changed, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we go along too. The other thing that we started doing, I think it was probably back in 2015, was what we call our On the Move Scientific Conference. So this meeting brings together people, researchers, clinicians, patients from all over, primarily the North America, but it's open to anybody, to talk about cutting edge science and what's going on in PCD world, and also to help establish priorities for what we need going forward. Our last meeting was in January 2024, and it was in Puerto Rico, and it was phenomenal. Lots of people came, lots of really interesting and exciting research was presented, and it was in Puerto Rico. So yes, that was very nice. Our next one, however, will be in August in 2025 at the Minneapolis Hilton downtown. Easier to get to, much cheaper place to hold a meeting, and we're hoping we have a really exceptional meeting in Minneapolis. We also do direct and indirect funding of research. We do an annual ATS match grant, and this is the Margaret Lee Young Investigator Award that is available internationally. We also do travel scholarships to ATS, and we fund small pilot and supplemental grants within our network. And then finally, and most importantly, patient support and education. We have an online venue called PCDF Connect. We provide patient educational materials and resources, webinars like this one, and referral to accredited PCD centers. This particular program of patient support and education is what we really want to focus on in the upcoming years. So there'll be more about that as we talk to. So who are our people? We have a board of directors that really are in charge. In a nonprofit organization, it is the board of directors who create the priorities, who set the direction, and come up with a strategic plan to move forward. Our board of directors are all patients or parents, with the exception of Dr. Lee, who joined and is now vice chair of the board. But you will see our list of directors there, any one of whom would be happy to talk to you. We'll make these slides available after this presentation too, so you can refer to those things. In terms of staff, I'm the executive director. Lynn Ernie is the executive assistant. Many of you know Lynn. Alexa Lingris is our development director. And Kristen Wavel-Shiplet is the program manager. She's really being tasked with helping us with the Path to Clinical Trials program, meaning the clinical centers and the registry. Additionally, we fund salary support for two medical directors for our programs. One is Adam Shapiro from McGill. Dr. Shapiro is the medical director of our clinical research program, or excuse me, the clinical network and centers program. And then Michael O'Connor from Vanderbilt is in charge of our medical director for our registry. He has two assistant directors, Dr. Machogu from Indiana, and Dr. Metchin from Chapel Hill. Additionally, Roxanne Florida Collins works with him at Vanderbilt. She is an RN, and she's the registry nurse coordinator at Vanderbilt. So these are ambitious and challenging programs, but we would like to be able to share some of our progress with you all. None of this would have been possible without the Genetic Disorders of Mucociliary Clearance Consortium that I mentioned earlier. This consortium for research on PCD has been going for over 20 years, first under the leadership of Dr. Mike Knowles and Dr. Margaret Lee, and more recently under the leadership of Dr. Thomas Ferkel and Dr. Stephanie Davis. So this was an incredibly productive network for us, research network. The funding for this program runs out at the end of July next year. So the GDMCC will be phasing out, and the PCD Foundation, because of our work with the GDMCC, will be able to hopefully take over at least some of the functions that the GDMCC performed. So if you want to know more about the GDMCC, here is the site that you can check. It's got a lot of information about the studies that have been done, the publications that have come out of this network. And again, we will make sure that these slides are available so that you can access this information. So from the GDMCC, we were able to create the PCD Foundation Clinical and Research Centers Network, the CRCN. And again, just as a reminder, Dr. Shapiro is the medical director of that program. And here are where our sites are. This program has been growing exponentially since we started it. I think it was probably back in 2017 that we had our first official sites, and it has worked closely with the GDMCC so that we are all aligned on the criteria that are used for diagnosis and access to the best, most evidence-based therapies for individuals with PCD. So as of the annual report that was just done last month, we have 56 accredited centers. There were 10 new centers added this year. We have 9 centers on the schedule for upcoming accreditation. Accreditation is a process that by which we make sure a site is fulfilling the basic standards that are important for PCD and is involved in the network enough that they will be keeping up to date on new therapies, new research opportunities for our patients. There were 1,422 consultations at accredited centers this year. So the centers are getting known for being available for referral centers so that other doctors can send patients to the centers to get diagnostic workups. And then more than 2,000 patients are followed at our CRCN centers. So I just want to point out that we have about 2,000 people being followed at centers, but what you saw from the earlier numbers is that we have tens of thousands that we should be following. So the urgency is to find these patients, to get them into the centers, to get them into our registry so that we have the information we need to move forward on therapeutic development. During the last calendar year, our centers participated in 15 publications and 30 presentations on PCD, all of which helps to spread awareness, get the word out, and hopefully help to find these patients. So the other component of the Path to Clinical Trials is the PCD Foundation Registry. That again is run by Dr. O'Connor, and Dr. Machogu, and Dr. Metchin. And the purpose of the registry is to have clinically collected data on patients with known PCD that helps us to be able to recruit patients for studies, understand the natural history of the disease, and is FDA acceptable data that can be used for clinical trials. That means that because of this kind of stringent regulations, we are not capturing a lot of patients who don't have genetic proof of their PCD or who don't fit the criteria for other reasons. That is not to in any way suggest that they don't have PCD. It's just that the registry's role is to find patients that we can be able to say are proven to have PCD, are ready to be recruited into studies, and it would be acceptable to the FDA. We are looking for other options to capture the data on everybody else who doesn't meet the criteria for the registry at this point. So the growth of the registry, when we started in 2021, we had about 50 patients. And you can see the curve goes up nicely. We now, as of at the last annual report, have 627 patients in the registry. It says active number of sites, and that should actually be number of people in the registry. Oh shoot, I think we had, so the active number of sites graph didn't make it into the slides here, but it's 31. So we grew from 5 sites to begin with to now 31 sites actively entering patients. And the goal is to have all of our sites actively entering into the registry. So the split for adult versus ped patients is 218 adult participants and 409 pediatric participants. As we know, pediatric patients account for ages from birth to 18. Adult is everything 18 and above. So we should really have about twice as many adults as we have pediatric patients. But this is just an indication of how PCD has really been driven. PCD diagnosis and care has been driven by the pediatric community. And we are making a strong effort now to get more adult clinicians involved and find those patients sitting in bronchiectasis clinics who probably have PCD and don't know it. We're looking at the genetics here. You can see the genetics kind of follow the what's published. That DNA H5 in green here is the most common gene. 577 of our 627 entrants into the registry have known genes, and the rest do not, are entered on the basis of biopsy. But you can see the kind of the breakdown of genes here. This is DNA H11, this is CCDC 39, RSPH4A, CCDC 40, DNA I1, and Haydn. And there are now 56 known genes for PCD. So outside of those, what's it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 major genes, all the rest of the 56 genes are represented in this big kind of purplish category. So the genes get to be very, very rare. If you look at our 56 genes in PCD and the number of people affected, it really is like having 56 separate ultra rare conditions that we're looking at with PCD. So to help move our path to clinical trials forward and really move into clinical trials, we are now working on a new program called the Network for Clinical Trials. And what this will do is create a one-stop shop for industry, for drug developers, for people interested in trying to come up with therapies for PCD, so they don't have to go to 56 separate sites. They can go to one site and we can have representation from the 56 sites through this network and prioritize clinical trials and make sure that we're getting what we need for our patient community. This is still in development, but what it will roughly look like is a steering committee that oversees a coordinating center, which will probably be at UNC because they have already created a center there through the GDMCC network. And then there will be an executive committee and different committees engaged with helping to oversee requests for clinical trials within our network. So that brings us to promising therapies in the pipeline. I think this is something that we've all been hoping for many years. When my daughter was diagnosed in 1991, I was told there would never be research. It was too complex. It was too genetic. It was too rare. So the therapies would only be borrowed from other disorders. There'd be nothing specific for PCD. Well, I'm happy to say that's not true, that there are some PCD specific things in the pipeline right now, in addition to therapies that from used in other disorders that look like they could be very useful in PCD. So this is not meant to be a completely accurate description of where these different trials are at. It's just a snapshot of a few of the things going on and where they're at in the development phase. So when we look at therapeutics for PCD, for now, we kind of put them into three big buckets. One is gene-based therapies, one is symptom-focused therapies, and then the other is regenerative therapies. And how these basically work is gene-based therapies are targeting the underlying genetic defect, and by correcting that defect, you can really fundamentally change the course of disease. Symptom-focused therapies are also important because we have a lot of genes. It will take a long time to get gene-based therapies. And so we need to be treating symptoms. We need to make sure that no patient is left behind while we're waiting to get the gene-based therapies up and running. And then regenerative therapies, it's great if you can fix the problem with PCD through a gene-based therapy, or you have really great symptom-focused therapies that help with symptoms and progression of disease. But if you already have significant disease, those are not going to be of much use to you. So regenerative therapies are really focused on trying to fix the damage that's already been done. You can see that that particular category is a little less far advanced than the others. We're talking stem cell therapies, things that are really challenging, but hopefully in a decade or two will be available for the patients that need them. So I'm going to focus, we've done some webinars with Recode on a mRNA therapy that they are working on. A company called Atheris in Germany is also working on an mRNA therapy. But I'm going to focus a little bit on symptom-focused therapies now, just because there's been some exciting developments with some of these drugs. So we used to talk about, excuse me, with bronchiectasis, which is kind of the final pathway for disorders like cystic fibrosis and PCD, and it refers to a state where the airways themselves are damaged and have become floppy and are no longer structurally sound, and they become a holding place really for mucus that isn't moving, and that mucus becomes infected. It's a great place for growing bacteria and viruses and fungi, and it creates a situation where we used to call the vicious cycle. Mucus sits and gets infected, the infection leads to inflammation, and the inflammation leads to structural damage. What we know now is that it's not a nice linear circle. Any of these things can happen at any time and result in the end state, the end result of bronchiectasis. So a lot of focus has been on the infection, which is natural, getting rid of some of those microbes that are causing problems in the airway and triggering inflammation. But in the past few years, there's been a bigger emphasis on looking at inflammation itself as a treatable problem in bronchiectasis. So you probably have heard of anti-inflammatories, things like steroids or NSAIDs, and those are very good when used appropriately for certain kinds of inflammation. Unfortunately, the type of inflammation usually seen in disorders like CF and PCD that lead to bronchiectasis is not that type of inflammation. It's a different type of inflammation driven by bacterial infection. So in the past few years, several companies have been targeting specifically this type of inflammation, neutrophilic inflammation. And the two that have made are kind of getting farther along with these studies is Insmed's brensocatib, the ASPEN trial, and Boehringer Ingelheim will be releasing the results of their AirLeaf trial. We're going to focus a little bit more on the Insmed trial because some of those results are coming out and were presented at a meeting in Scotland that we were at in July. Specifically, and more work needs to be done, but the phase 2 trials showed that patients were able to preserve their lung function and had fewer exacerbations when they were on this drug. And it was a fairly profound effect. we're hoping that the same thing will be true with the other anti-inflammatories in development. But the main thing to message here is that these trials now will go into phase 3, and they will need a lot of people. And if you have the opportunity and the interest to participate in one of these trials, that would be extremely helpful. The Aspen trial had 1,628 people in it, and 136 of those people were adults with PCD. We're hoping to get a readout and an analysis of just the PCD subgroup, hopefully by our meeting in August, to see how PCD patients fared on these drugs. But in the meantime, there will be additional opportunities to participate and opportunities for younger patients to participate as well. So just be aware of that. So I'd also like to talk a little bit about community engagement. Sometimes we have gotten so busy doing what we need to do that we don't slow down and think about how we can get help from the community that we work with. And we really need help. We need help from patients in the community serving on committees and advisory councils. We need help amplifying the voice of people with PCD. And this could be done by sharing your story on meetings, at meetings that we have on panels. For instance, at the August 2025 meeting that we'll be talking about in a little bit, patients and families are more than welcome. We would really love to see you there. And we would love to have patient speakers for our sessions who can talk to researchers and clinicians about their experience with PCD. We would love to see some sorts of programs to work closely with your local PCD center for education and fundraising activities. And then maybe an ambassadors program at our annual meeting, so that patients who are new to PCD wouldn't feel maybe as uncomfortable or like they don't know what's going on. I guess mainly, if I could say anything, is people with really good organizational skills that could help us figure out what we need to do to better engage our community. We would love to hear from you. We need help with that. So it's a big job. We're working as fast as we can, but getting a little bit overwhelmed, and anything that the community can do to help, we would love your input. So then I would like to just talk a little bit about upcoming events. So we'll be doing a series of webinars, including an upcoming webinar on airway clearance on October 25th, to which you are all invited. This webinar will be talking about the different options for airway clearance, and also some of the practical considerations about how you clean your equipment, how you choose which one is best for you or your child. So please get that on your calendar. Will be, I'm assuming, the noon hour, because that's when we normally do them. And that will be a 90-minute webinar, because we want to have time to talk about some of the cleaning and other practical aspects of airway clearance. We'll be doing an update on Insmed's anti-inflammatory drug in November, the date to be determined. This will be presented by Dr. Mark Matursky, who is one of the PIs of the trial. So we're excited to hear what he has to say. For October awareness, we also are posting PCD facts to our socials and our email. The website is listed here, as well as our Facebook page, where we post everything. We have an Instagram page. We have all kinds of social media venues. If you have questions about any of that, please reach out to Lynn Ernie. If you'd like to get on our email list, there's your contact, Lynn Ernie at PCDfoundation.org. Lastly, we'll be doing a big meeting in 2025 in the Minneapolis Hilton. Families are more than welcome. We would love to have a real presence from people with PCD at this meeting. So get it on your calendar. No registration fee for families and patients. And we would be delighted if you could make it. And this will be our transition to Alexa coming online here to talk a little bit about a campaign for the future. And this will be kicked off in November 8th at the Chicago History Museum in Chicago, Illinois. Alexa, do you want to jump in?
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Michelle. So Michelle talked a little bit today about our ambitious plans, and in addition to that, the significant need that we have to support them, both philanthropically and together as a community through our engagement and advocacy. So we're excited to launch what we're referring to as the Ignite the Future, a campaign to clear the way, which we will be doing at the event that Michelle just shared in Chicago in November. And in the months to follow, we will be sharing more information about ways to participate and things that you can do to be part of this campaign. This will be a significant effort to raise funds to support all of these programs and the growth that Michelle just outlined, but it will also be a concerted effort to really build our community, increase awareness, and engage our patients. So we hope that you will stay tuned and look for more information and join us in this effort. This is definitely something that's going to require all of us to come together to succeed. And we're looking forward to hearing from you and partnering with you and amplifying your voice. So Lynn and I are happy to answer any questions you have, but you can expect to receive more information on this in the coming months.
Thank you. And now we want to open the floor for questions. I know we went through stuff pretty quickly, but we wanted to leave a lot of time for the community to ask questions. I'm available, Lynn's available, Dr. Lee is available, and Alexa is available. So if you have questions that you think any of us can answer, please feel free to type them in the Q&A box. We have one question about, is there a tool to double check if we are in the registry? The best way to double check if you're in the registry would be to ask your provider at your center. You would have had to sign a consent form to be in the registry because it is technically a natural history study. So it can be confusing. If you've participated in other PCD things and you've signed forms, you might think that you're in the registry, but actually it's a very specific study consent that you would have signed. So I would check with your provider. What can you say about brensocatib bad sides? Is there anything about it? There was concern about, and maybe McGee, you can weigh in on this, a condition that affects the skin and the hair. But I think they in the studies, they didn't see a lot of problem with that.
That's correct. That was the major thing that they were concerned about.
So we have, how many years could it take for the current trial, RCT 1100, to recruit children? So that is the mRNA therapy that right now is just focused on DNA I1 variants in PCD. I think that's hard to answer. It depends on a lot of things. Like right now it's in phase 1, so we're just establishing safety and efficacy. And always that is done in adults first, and then it would move down to children. But I think the thing to remember is that it's not just a linear process. There's not just one company doing one gene, then doing the next gene, then getting down to children. There are a lot of companies in this area right now. So I guess it's pretty hard to answer. Any upcoming clinics in the Phoenix area? If you're talking about a clinical center in the Phoenix area, we have a couple that we have been communicating with. One is at Children's Hospital, Phoenix Children's Hospital, and then there is an adult provider at Scottsdale, Mayo. So if so far the accreditation requirements have not been met for those sites, and we don't know if they will be. It mainly that revolves around equipment to do diagnostic testing and access to that equipment. But in terms of care, there are certainly providers there that could be helpful. So go ahead, feel free to send me an email at info@, and I can get you some names, info@pcdfoundation.org. Okay. Oh, Catherine, this is an excellent question. Are there any plans for a clinical trial to test the efficacy of inhaled Toby for Pseudomonas, specifically in PCD? Not that we are aware of. So one of the things that's been interesting and a little bit frightening is with the success of the cystic fibrosis modulator therapies, the interest in drugs for treating Pseudomonas has waned a little bit. So it's going to be challenging to get anti-Pseudomonal drugs tested in PCD. It's possible. I don't know. McGee, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that to do the study, it took a lot of patients in CF to do those studies. And so it's going to, I think one thing that the Network for Clinical Trials is going to have to address is what are the highest priority studies. If people are engaged in one study, they won't be able to participate in another clinical trial. I think that as far as testing an antimicrobial that's inhaled, we already have a lot of data from the CF Foundation. You would expect that at least the antimicrobial working on a bacteria, it would be very similar. So I'm not sure that's necessarily a high priority clinical trial for us to work on, at least at this time. Some of these new anti-inflammatories and the mRNA therapies, I think may be more impactful.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we're hopeful about is that some of these newer therapies that are not antibiotics may reduce the need for antibiotics and resolve two issues at once. There's no guarantees, that's why you do studies, but that's kind of the hope. Let's see, we are currently using the Baxter Vest and receiving pushback from insurance stating it's an experimental therapy. Has anyone else had this issue? This is for an 8-year-old with PCD. I'm going to say pretty much everyone has had that issue. And part of the problem is the companies don't provide the evidence required for insurance companies to feel comfortable paying a lot of money. What we were told and what has been true, I think, for a lot of people in the community is no is just the first step in negotiation. So they will tell you no, and they will tell you no, and they will tell you no. And you just have to keep fighting for it. I think that's really going to be true, especially with newer devices, because there isn't the evidence to support using them. Dallas-Fort Worth area, we actually have a center. So I would strongly recommend contacting us to get information about that provider. Are there age limits in clinical studies? Yes, there are, and it can vary by study. Most studies start with adults, and there are other criteria as well. So it's not just age, it's your pulmonary function. It may be if you have other comorbidities. These are called inclusion and exclusion criteria. So age limits are often an inclusion-exclusion criteria for studies. For some of the anti-inflammatories, they now have the data in adults. They believe they've shown safety, so they're looking to go to the FDA to start including pediatric patients. But even when they do that, they generally start at 12 and then go up. There's a desire to protect the little kids from any unknown consequences of drugs or interventions. So it takes a little bit of time to get the kids involved.
Also, some of the clinical trials will have an upper limit of age because they want to limit events that might happen to somebody who's a lot older, say a heart attack or something like that, that would then compromise the study if they couldn't say for sure whether that was related to the therapy or not. So sometimes they'll put an upper limit like 45 for the clinical trials. But I think for PCD, where we have limited number of patients, we're making a push to make that upper limit higher, so that we can enroll an adequate number of adults in those trials.
Can you talk a little bit more about the phasing out of the GDMCC? Why is it being disbanded or phased out? What might we lose as a community as a result? And how either the PCD Foundation or our community can help continue its work? Excellent questions all the way around. So the GDMCC was, when it was initially funded, this was an NIH program called the Rare Diseases Clinical Trials Network. And it was, each consortium had to come with multiple diseases and a plan of how they were going to try to share resources for these rare diseases to get the information that we needed. So we were funded for the first 5 years back in 2002, I think it was. And then you had to reapply every 5 years. So we got 4 5-year grants. We've been around for 20 years. And now the NIH is saying, and this is fair, that it's time for other rare diseases to also have an opportunity to take advantage of this program. So because we knew that this was coming, it's why we started working collectively on the PCD Centers Network and the registry with our GDMCC partners so that we were prepared for the phasing out of the GDMCC. We're hoping there won't be a tremendous loss as to our community, and we don't think that there will be because the other efforts have taken off and are doing very well. To help the foundation and the community, PCD community, to continue this work takes a lot of money, takes a lot of people, takes a lot of willingness to participate in trials. Right now, the biggest issue that we have, and it's making us all a little bit nervous, is with the RECODE trial. We are struggling just to get 9 people enrolled in a trial. And when that happens, the rest of the drug development community looks at a group and says, they're not that interested. We can't get people involved. There are a lot of reasons why we're having trouble getting 9 people or 10 people. And it's not entirely that people aren't interested, but when the opportunity arises, if you can, and it fits with your lifestyle and your needs, we strongly encourage people to engage in clinical trials. It's important for all of us. I also think working closely with your center, and if they have initiatives that we can jointly pursue to help with fundraising, to help make sure that we have the money that we all need to get these programs up, keep them up and running, that would be great.
One more thing in response to that question, the GDMCC is not disbanded. It's losing its funding from the NIH, and the PCD Foundation is really working to have the resources to continue funding that at an even larger level by bringing in some of these other clinical centers and expanding it. So I would not see this as a disbanding. It's building on what the GDMCC did to go to the next level.
Is there any discussion about opening a PCD center in Alaska? There is not, but what a great idea. I think the problem to be a center is the centers require resourcing that may not be available in Alaska. So for now, a lot of the patients in Alaska are being seen at our center in Seattle. But we would like to have a center everywhere. We just received confirmation of Carter-Gainer syndrome for our child through genetics. The child will be born in November, a little girl. What trials should we be considering? And a broad question, or maybe hope for some words of wisdom for us. First of all, congrats. That's exciting. McGee, I'm going to turf this one to you.
Well, I would really encourage you to get linked up with a PCD center. I don't know where you're from, but you can contact us and we can let you know where a nearby center is. So there'll be, you can get linked up with clinicians even before your child is born to start teaching you about PCD and what to expect. Certainly there are resources on our website and places like that, but I think at this point, you really need to connect with a clinician so you know who you're going to be talking to.
The other thing that you could do right now is join PCDF Connect online and talk to, there are all kinds of parents from all over the world that participate on that page. It's a private group on Facebook, and we'd be happy to send you the link. And sometimes the parents come up with such great ideas for airway clearance, for dealing with some of the day-to-day things of having a child with PCD. That might be really, really helpful. Okay, I don't attend a PCD clinical center, so I don't have a provider. Can you enter the registry yourself online? So the answer to that is right now is no, but we are working on coming up with an option so that the vast majority of people who aren't seen at a center would like to be able to register. So we're looking at something to make sure that that's available to everybody. And there'll be more on that. So just if you're on our email list or you follow us on our venues, that look for information as that moves forward. Is a 5-year-old patient welcome to sit through PCD on the move seminar with parents? I don't think we have any objection to that. I do think it would be extremely boring for a 5-year-old because these are science heavy sessions. And our goal this year is after the sessions to have kind of an overview with a clinician who can help explain to parents and patients what they just heard. And probably a 5-year-old would struggle a little bit with that. Yeah, so let's think about that. I don't think we would turn anyone away, but I just think it's probably not something. I have a 5-year-old grandson and I can't even get him to sit still through supper. So I don't know how we would do with a session. Good afternoon. Is there any new research on the care of recurring ear infection with PCD? Are tubes recommended for these kids? Thank you. McGee, turfing it once again.
We don't have any active research trials on recurring ear infections in the United States. I think most ear, nose, and throat specialists are recommending tubes for kids that are at that critical age for developing speech and dependent on hearing well. So at this point, we haven't gotten our ENT colleagues engaged to really systematically study this. I can tell you that in the UK, their tendency is to go to hearing aids and not tubes, and nobody has done a side-by-side comparison to say which is better.
The one thing to be aware of in the US, I don't know if this applies in Canada or Mexico, but hearing aids are often not a covered service. So we almost have a situation where tubes become necessary because the other option isn't available. So just be aware of that and make sure if you decide to go the hearing aid route that that you have coverage for hearing aids or that's something you can afford on your own. It's crazy, but that's the way it is. Could you speak more about variants of unknown significance in PCD and latest updates on patients who have variants of unknown significance? I'll just start this off by saying we have more people with variants of unknown significance than we have with people with known pathogenic mutations. And it is a huge problem. Several of the PCD genes are enormous. They're going to have a lot of variants. It's very hard to tell which are disease causing and which are not. And there are efforts underway to address that. And maybe, Mickey, if you want to talk a little bit about ClinVar and ClinGen.
Yeah, there's a group, an international group of PCD clinicians and geneticists who are looking systematically through all the genes and putting a priority on whether there's limited evidence that this is a gene associated with PCD all the way up to definitive evidence. And that group has gone through all but about, I think they've got 2 or 3 more genes to go through all the data and put a designation on them. The next step is to go through all the variants, and that's a huge effort. The group has just gone through and defined all the criteria they're going to use in reviewing each of the variants, and should be launching into that for DNA H5 by the end of the year. DNA H5 is a very large gene, and most of our patients, what 30%, that's the gene that's got the highest percentage of patients, which is about 30% of the PCD patients. So going through all those variants is going to take a lot of time, but we will get through it. This is not going to be something that gets done in a year or two. It will take many years to go through all these genes and all the variants. But the good part is it's a international collaborative doing this. So people who have all the patients that they've seen in their database with the variants can say, oh, well, I have 3 people with that, and another group may say they have 3. Well, if 2 groups have 3 patients, that's evidence that this is disease causing. So that would be enough to take somebody from a variant of unknown significance to a likely pathogenic.
Is it suggested to do inhaled antibiotics for Pseudomonas in the 1 month on, 1 month off pattern as a prevention, such as Caistin? I'm going to send the clinical questions to you, Mickey.
I think what you're saying is if somebody had Pseudomonas recovered in a culture, would you do this to prevent them from getting a chronic infection? I think. I don't think anybody would use these to prevent, in somebody who did not ever have Pseudomonas, that they would use those inhaled antibiotics to keep them from getting Pseudomonas. But once they have Pseudomonas, some people might use one of these agents for prevention. In my experience, in young children, Pseudomonas may come and go, and it doesn't stay. And I would not be inclined to add that therapy until it was more that you saw it more than once in a year in a culture.
So the other thing,
that's a lot of time, a lot of money, and over time, if you use these therapies, you develop resistance to them, and they won't be useful later on. So it's not an easily answered question.
I think there's also the insurance side of that insurance companies, these are expensive drugs, and they may not want to cover something like that for a preventative, especially in PCD, because there's not been studies of Caistin in PCD. A lot of people have trouble getting on it, period. So, yeah, I think that depends a lot on circumstances. Current strategy of clinical trials network in managing eligibility requirements for subsequent studies. It's an excellent question. We were just at this CF meeting and that came up. So what the question is asking here is if you participate in maybe one of these gene-based therapies, are you going to be able to participate in other trials for other therapies? Again, Mickey, I'm going to turf it to you.
Okay. What we heard at the CF meeting is that it depends on which type of gene-based therapy they're looking at. For mRNA therapies, it may be 6 months up to maybe an upper limit of 2 years, that they want to monitor those patients to make sure there are no subsequent ill effects from being on that medication. For some of the viral vector type gene transfer, it may be that they would want to watch for 5 years, meaning they couldn't be in another trial for 5 years, so that they'd have time to see if there were any longer, any ill effects that appeared later. But for the, if you're getting into gene editing, what we're hearing is it may be 15 years that they would want to follow before you could be in other clinical trials. Those are the longest times that I've heard of for people to say they have to be monitored without being in any other clinical trials. And the reason is, if you were put on another clinical trial and you had a side effect from the second trial, they aren't going to know whether it's from that or a late effect from the gene-based therapy. So, and this is directed by the FDA. This is not the investigator. The investigator can make a recommendation, or the pharma company can make a recommendation, but the FDA may put a much longer time period for some of these new therapies that we really don't have a whole lot of experience in any disease.
This is where informed consent is important. And before you are part of a study, any of those kind of considerations will be explained to you in the informed consent process, so that you can make a decision based on all the information. Pharma has begun to focus more on PCD. What do you think is driving that? What do you think is most important to build momentum among pharma companies, and what will motivate them? So we think there's a couple things driving it. The first is that the modulator therapies in CF have been so successful that they are looking for other disease groups that they can be developing therapies for. And the second is the COVID mRNA vaccine development. That really opened the door to some of these mRNA therapies. When you look at a disorder like PCD, there's so much genetic complexity just in the number of genes that we have, that it seemed overwhelming. But the rapid development of an mRNA-based vaccine showed that it could be done. So I think a couple of those things played into this. The most important thing to building momentum is to have a robust registry that has the kind of data they need to help develop their programs. So getting as many people into our registry as quickly as possible is important. We have a goal that by the end of 3 years, we'll have gone from 627 registry entrants to 2,000. That seems like it's a very doable goal. And we have to have a research-ready community. We have to demonstrate to these companies that we can recruit patients and get these trials done, and that they won't fail. So that will motivate them. Mickey, you have any other thoughts?
Yeah, we've been building that momentum. The GDMCC, was able to get people in and get them diagnosed, and then started doing natural history studies, looking more at sinus disease, some of those sorts of things. So, and published. And so pharma sees that. So I think that all of that was building momentum. But the real urgency now, I think, is coming from the mRNA therapies. That is here. All of a sudden, we're here, and we got to get the program ready when they're knocking on our door.
We are like 1 minute and have a whole bunch of questions left here. So I'm okay with hanging on a little bit if everybody else is. But let's try to just get some of these knocked out that we can knock out quickly. We had a question here about PCD centers in Germany and in the EU? Yes, there are PCD centers both in Germany and in the rest of the EU. And I think probably if you go to ERN Lung, they have a website, it's ERN and then Lung, and look for the PCD core. It lists all of the groups and all of the centers in Germany and in the EU. Does inhaled Toby have any bad side effects?
Some patients get hoarseness, very bad sore throat. Some patients, if they don't rinse their mouth afterwards, may get like thrush, like babies get in their mouth. They may get a fungal infection like that in their mouth, or mouth sores. Some patients can get some bronchospasm, that it's irritating to the airways, and so they get chest tightness. So there are some side effects if you read in about Toby, but they're not, you know, they're not frequently bad side effects.
Are you saying the vest may not be useful? No, it's not a matter of different modalities of airway clearance not being useful. It's that the evidence to support them hasn't been a focus of the people developing the therapies, and the insurance companies want to see evidence to support making payments, and they will use lack of evidence as a reason to not make payments. So it's just a kind of a gray area that we get into. I would really strongly encourage you to attend the airway clearance webinar that we're going to be doing on the 25th, because we'll be talking about all of these things and ways around it. We also do, as a foundation, have a letter of support when an insurance company denies access to any kind of a therapy like a vest or the Baxter vest or any of those therapies, that we are happy to provide for you to share with your insurance companies. I'm not sure how much impact it has. Once they've decided no, they kind of can stick to their guns, but we're happy to provide that for you. What do you know about Burkholderia cepacia, PCD, and effective treatments?
We just published a paper. Actually, it came out of the PCD on the Move meeting. One of the people at Puerto Rico presented a case of Burkholderia cepacia. We asked everybody in the audience if they'd seen that. There were two other groups, one from UNC, one from Montreal. So those three cases were pulled together and reported. Those are the only three cases that I know of Burkholderia cepacia and PCD. All three were eradicated with therapy for Burkholderia. So they did not persist. There was a decline in lung function with the Burkholderia cepacia infection. And we don't know whether that, because we haven't followed those patients long enough, we don't know whether that persisted after eradicating the organism.
How do we find out about more basic research studies in PCD? So when I first got the diagnosis, what I did is went to PubMed. It's the NIH managed library of medical journals, and typed in primary ciliary dyskinesia, and you will find so much information, articles, both basic science and clinical science. So I always recommend that to anybody who just wants to know more about PCD. It's PubMed, and then just type in the search box, primary ciliary dyskinesia.
I also shared them with them, the link for, because they were asking about studies. So I shared the link for clinicaltrials.gov.
Oh yeah, that's great too.
Privately, okay.
So those are not basic science, though. Those are clinical trials with human beings. So there won't be much on basic science on clinicaltrials.gov.
Okay.
My daughter was diagnosed with mycobacterium. Can you talk about this bacteria and the treatment options?
Okay, there are different types of Mycobacterium. Mycobacterium tuberculosis is the organism that causes tuberculosis. We usually refer to all the other Mycobacterium as non-tuberculous mycobacteria, or NTM. But then they're just different organisms within that, like Mycobacterium abscessus, Mycobacterium avium complex. There's a whole long list of different mycobacteriums. But this is an organism. Most of these are found in the soil. It may be more common in the southeast, but can occur in other places. And these organisms usually have a thick cell wall. They're not easily treated with antibiotics. Oftentimes you need 3, 4 antibiotics at the same time. So it's an organism we see in cystic fibrosis, PCD, bronchiectasis. It likes moist environments, and so once it gets into the airways, it can be sometimes challenging to treat, and the courses of antibiotics are longer than for other organisms.
A lot of the emphasis on the anti-inflammatories in non-CF bronchiectasis is also to kind of help with NTM infections, because when you talk about non-CF bronchiectasis, NTM infections, the non-tuberculous mycobacterium is a big part of that. So I don't know that came out in the Aspen trial. I don't know. It kind of, as I recall, and Mickey maybe refresh my memory, it didn't seem like it appeared that the anti-inflammatories did a lot to help with the NTM.
I don't know that they had enough to say. I couldn't tell that they had enough data to say definitively.
But that may be an area to just keep your eye on as a potential to help too. Let's see. Any thoughts on the progress or lack of in getting insurance to recognize PCD and create the necessary codes for its treatments? Oh man, that is a loaded question and so timely. We still do not have a code for PCD, a diagnostic code. It's called an ICD-10 code. We've been working on it for 20 years. Most rare diseases do not have these codes, and it creates a huge problem for getting insurance coverage. So there is an active group at the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative trying to rectify that and get codes for rare disorders. And we've been working on that, but we still are not there yet. This is really frustrating because the newest coding book came out, and there is a code, believe it or not, for getting sucked into a jet engine. And there is a code for walking into a lamppost, but there is no code for PCD. So it's just been an area of complete frustration for a lot of us for a long time. This is an excellent question too. Missed the beginning of the session. Is the RECODE study completing phase 1? 2 of my children participated. I had the impression that they did get 9 participants, 2 from the UK. Yes, they did for the first phase of phase 1. Now they are moving into phase 1B, and again, needing about 10 participants. And that's where we're running into some challenges. But thank you for bringing that up.
And thank your sons for participating.
Knowing all that you know now, if your child was diagnosed yesterday, mine was 5 years old, located in Arkansas, where would you start? Knowing what I know now, I would start with there's a PCD center at the University of Arkansas, Dr. Zina Ghazala, she's fantastic. So I would start there, and then I would get onto PCDF Connect or PCD UK Support or any of the online family support groups that can help just provide basic information about getting therapies done, writing letters for school, all of that sort of thing. And provide support. It's a scary thing to get a new diagnosis. And I think that would be really excellent if you could get get some feedback from other parents. You said steroids aren't good for PCD patients. Is there somewhere we can see the medications that are recommended to help with inflammation and airway clearance assistance? So I want to be clear, I did not mean to imply that steroids aren't good for PCD patients. Steroids are very good when they're used appropriately. And sometimes that is important in PCD, but this is kind of a clinical question. So I want to turf it over to Dr. Lee.
Yeah, at this point, we really have only, there's only one medication that we're using that's been tested in clinical trial for PCD, and that's azithromycin to prevent exacerbations. So we really can't tell you within PCD patients, we don't have evidence from clinical trials for any therapy. We're going by what we have found with cystic fibrosis and other chronic lung conditions. As far as where can you find information, probably there's we did have a consensus, and Lynn, maybe you can put this in there, the reference, the consensus on diagnosis and treatment of PCD. It's now, going on 10 years old, maybe, and we need to update it. But I think that gives you some of our thoughts about what medicines, what kind of priority we put on medications and their use in PCD.
Thank you for the meeting. I have a request. We live in Tbilisi, Georgia. Unfortunately, we don't have doctors who manage PCD patients. So they need some help with their sister's lung condition. She can share results of her CT scans and lots of things. Can you help me? What I would recommend, Sabina, is that you write to me at info@pcdfoundation.org. And we can try to connect you with Dr. Amran in Germany, who has seen patients from Georgia or been in contact with them and could possibly help you as well. Let's put the email address in Tulin if you have a minute. That would be great. How do you balance the anti-inflammatory use of azithromycin against negative GI impacts? Mickey, you're on call.
Yeah, I mean, every medication you got to do this, don't you? I mean, you're weighing the risks and the benefits. So I think if you have multiple exacerbations a year, 3 or 4 exacerbations a year, and you can cut those down to 1, that's saying that would have a huge impact. If you're having an exacerbation once every other year, I wouldn't worry about azithromycin. So it really is on a case-by-case basis, weighing the upside and the downside of these medications. But yes, azithromycin can have negative GI.
Can Pseudomonas remain after taking antibiotics for staph and Pseudomonas with amoxicillin and Cipro? Is getting another sputum test after antibiotic use ideal?
I don't know. Well, yes, they could persist. I think getting a sputum culture at some point after antibiotics, but not necessarily, you stop antibiotics the day you stop them. I don't know that really helps. I would say I like to check sputum cultures 3 or 4 times a year, spread out, just so I know if something's new come in. And so after a course of antibiotics, the next time you go to clinic, I think it'd be appropriate to get a sputum culture, but I don't think you need it right when you stop the antibiotics.
I'm going to ask this one together because it's the same person questioning. Can inhaled Toby affect kidneys or hearing? And could biologic medications help targeting lung inflammation, or are these problematic due to immunosuppressive effects?
Yeah, the whole point of inhaling Toby was to get a higher dose into the lungs, and a lower dose to the kidneys and the ears than you do when you use IV tobramycin. So yes, tobramycin affects the kidneys. That's why if you're on IV antibiotics, you check creatinine and kidney function throughout the course of IV tobramycin. I have seen one case where a patient on Toby had a change in their kidney function. That was a CF patient, but so the word can is, I'd have to say yes. Does it frequently happen? I'd say no. And the same for hearing. And I think that there are just some people that absorb the tobramycin through the lungs into the bloodstream more than others. And so they get a high enough amount into the bloodstream that they might affect their kidneys or their hearing.
And the biologics for biologic medications targeting lung inflammation, are these problematic due to immunosuppressive effects?
I'm not sure which biologics you're talking about. There may be some of the antibodies. I'm not sure which ones. There are some that focus more on eosinophilic inflammation, that like Dupixent or things like that. I'm not sure if that's what you're talking about. And it would depend on whether you had that type of inflammation in the lung as to whether they would be helpful.
It's kind of starting to look like inflammation is as diverse as, the different bacteria that you might get, that you wouldn't treat every bacteria the same way. You treat it for what is effective against it. And it's the same way with inflammation. So that's where the discussion about steroids, a lot of steroid kind of inflammation is that steroids help, is not the same kind of inflammation necessarily that you're getting in PCD, but it's still kind of a newer area of interest. So we don't know everything about it. What we do know is an awful lot of patients are on steroids and with PCD are on steroids, and there's not a lot of evidence one way or the other to support that. So we just don't know if it's the best plan. Let's see. Any evidence of sensory issues associated with PCD?
There's certainly with balance, with all the ear disease. There's some patients who have challenges with balance because their middle ear disease has affected their whatever those are that control balance in the ear. So I've seen that. There are some side effects from some medications that can give you peripheral neuropathy, if that's what you mean by sensory issues. I don't think that's been directly associated with PCD, but it may be associated with some of the therapies.
John Matthews from Recode put in a link to a great primer on PCD, but it is unfortunately behind a paywall. So we'll come up with something and share that with the group. We'll figure out a way to get a primer to you. Are you aware of centers in South Africa? No, but there is a great physician at Sick Kids in Toronto who is from South Africa, Fiona Kitzinger, and she may know of people in South Africa. So we can certainly reach out to her and see if she has any recommendations. Oh, this is an excellent one. John Matthews just put free access overview, recent overview, and it is an excellent overview. So that is in the Q&A. Please feel free to copy it. And
that has all 54 of the presently PCD associated genes. All 54 of those genes are in there with information about each of them.
Can you provide information from Dr. Amran in Germany? Yes, we can. let me see. Lynn, can you look up Dr. Omron's info quick and put it in the Q&A?
Yeah, doing that now.
Thank you. Does the foundation ever work with hospitals that do not have a PCD location to educate providers and the community? If no, how can we start that? I'm finding a large lack of knowledge in our area. Yes, sadly, that is not surprising. We do, but we generally do it through our network of centers. So people that are PCD experts will go and do what's called grand rounds at different hospitals around the country and do some training about PCD, or they'll talk at local thoracic society meetings and that sort of a thing. And that can be very effective, but it takes a while. I think that it would be great for families to start doing some of those things, to offer your services, to talk about your experiences with PCD for grand rounds or for an education day at a hospital or at a thoracic society. I think that would be wonderful, and we could certainly help you come up with some sort of a package to submit to do those things if you're interested.
We also have give lectures at national meetings about PCD, fellows conferences, things like that, to try to spread the word.
Is it possible that inhaled antibiotics might not be helpful if you have pseudomonases in the sinuses as well as the lungs? How would that work?
Yeah, that's a question that comes up. How can we address the sinuses? And so I think you need to talk to your ENT doctor and get your ENT doctor to talk to your lung doctor to try to address both of them at the same time. If you think that that's the reason why you're having trouble clearing Pseudomonas from the lungs.
Do you have any knowledge of connections between PCD and excessive palm sweatiness?
Not that I know of.
Are there any drugs that might have that kind of a side effect?
Not off the top of my head.
Okay, and I can't say that we've heard that particular one either. How do you see the PCD Foundation's mission evolving going forward, and why that direction? I think the evolution is clear, that we really needed to focus early on just being able to make the diagnosis, try to find the patients, try to get everybody into centers where we could start collecting information and learn about the disease. And we still have to do that. But the mission going forward is to really get engaged in clinical trials and get therapies for this disorder. For most of our existence, that wasn't even an option. There was not any interest on the part of pharma with for PCD. It was just seen as too rare and too challenging. That has changed, and we feel like we really need to take advantage of that now, to jump on this while we have the opportunity and become a clinical trials focused organization. So that is kind of where we're going, and that is our rationale for it. Is lung resection recommended with progressing bronchiectasis in PCD?
I bet you want me to answer that one.
Yes, I do.
So there was a time when lung resection was done frequently in PCD, particularly if the middle lobe, which is where a lot of times the bronchiectasis is the worst, was the only place that seemed to have bronchiectasis. And the thought was, well, if we take out the middle lobe, that will protect the rest of the lung. The issue is that the ciliary defect is throughout the lung. And so taking out parts of the lung is not likely to benefit. And, you know, this is major chest surgery. It's going to hurt to cough and all afterwards. And so it may take a year to recover from a lung resection. So I don't think that people would say it's recommended for progressing bronchiectasis. people might recommend it if you have an abscess or a particular infection localized to one area of the lung. Then they might say in that case to do it. But in general terms, I think now that people would not favor lung resection.
Any connection between PCD and inflammatory bowel disease, Crohn's disease?
I don't know that there's a direct association, meaning PCD and inflammatory bowel Crohn's, but I think the antibiotic therapies and the effect of some of our therapies on the GI tract may make inflammatory bowel disease more of an issue. So I think it's more related to some of the therapies we use in PCD rather than a genetic connection. But most of our patients have some degree of GI complaints that we haven't really systematically analyzed. So something may come out in the future.
What are you most excited or optimistic about with regard to PCD? If both Michele and Dr. Lee could weigh in. Okay, I'll weigh in. Sometimes I think about where we started and what we didn't know about PCD 20 plus years ago. And to think that we would be where we are today, where we're actually talking about therapies directed at the genetic cause of PCD, very effective therapies that will address some of the major symptomatic problems in PCD. It's astounding. And I think it feels like there's a kind of a snowballing effect that more and more is becoming available all the time. So I'm excited and optimistic because I think that there is going to be PCD for children born now is going to be a very different disorder than for children born 20 years ago or 40 years ago. So I think that that's really exciting.
Yeah, I'm excited about the future. And I'm excited that I have something to invest my energy in now that I've retired from clinical practice that's going to make a difference. I think the more we put into PCD now, the faster we're going to get to those therapies. And I know many of you on this call, I recognized a lot of names coming across there. And I think that if we all work together, as we have from the days of the early GDMCC days, if we continue to build on that, we've got a great future.
Couldn't say it better. That's a great ending. Thank you all so much. And I think we're probably going to have to cut things off here because we're at a half an hour longer than we were anticipated, but very much appreciate the interaction and the questions, and we'll try to make more opportunities available for discussions like this in the future. And we'll see you all on October 25th. Thank you.